Next slide. Next slide. Then I want to ask you to think about, what do you think about when I say profit, cash flow, and reputation? Next slide. You think, well, that's just business. That's what I do. That's part of my life. Or are you already ready to move on and say, what's the point, Jane? Okay, next slide. So here's the point. Sustainability, when it's done right, and this is very important, when it's done right, next slide, leads to more profit, cash flow, and reputation. It's an essential part of understanding sustainability. Next slide. And I want to dig a little deeper in this before we really get going in this presentation. Bill Blackburn developed a model called Show Me the Money, and it's designed to show how sustainability is embedded within business value. Next slide. All of us are aware of the economic business value. That's what creates the value and the wealth for our shareholders. Stock price, stock dividends, and these are driven by reputation, profits, and cash flow. Slide 9, please. If we dig deeper, we have sales and costs. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, and these are all driven by things like brand strength, the products that we sell, the productivity in our operations, supply chain costs, and legal liabilities. A number of factors feed into this. Next slide, please. But if we look at sustainability as a program that's embedded within our organization, we can find how it supports all of our operations as a business. Certainly, reputation is an aspect of sustainability that is important. Innovation is critical because the whole idea behind sustainability is to find new ways to do business. This innovation and other things like meeting our customer needs, all of those feed into the products and the services and the new markets that feed into our sales. Sustainability also affects, of course, things like employee relations and morale, workplace safety, waste prevention, energy efficiency. And again, these all are embedded within productivity. It's normal business practice. The trick is to understand how we can shift our business practice to make them more sustainable. And so as you go down the left-hand column, you can see how a number of items within a sustainability program are embedded directly in the sales and cost factors, and those feed into the business value of the operation. Slide 9, please. So, is this true? Do you buy into this? Well, there were researchers at the Harvard Business School and the London Business School that got together and identified 180 companies. And the basic premise that they went on when they chose these companies was they wanted companies that were in business in the early 90s and were still in business until 2010 and beyond. So the basic premise is that these are economically sustainable companies. Then what they did was they looked at the policies and strategies that were in place within each of these companies, and they divided them into two groups, the high sustainability group and the low sustainability group. And what they found across a number of factors that they examined was that the stock market price, the value of $1 invested in 1993 in the high sustainability group grew to $22.60 by 2010. But the low sustainability group, yes, they had more money, but not as much as the high sustainability group. $1 invested in 1993 grew to $15.40 by 2010 for the low sustainability group. Next slide, please. So their findings, the high sustainability companies significantly outperform low sustainability companies. The adoption of environmental and social policies appear to lead to more shareholder wealth and long-term competitive advantage. Next, please. The probable contributors to their performance, a more engaged workforce, more secure license to operate, social license to operate, more loyal and satisfied customer base, better relationships with stakeholders, greater transparency, more collaborative community, and better ability to innovate. Next slide, please. So here's my first question for you, with regard to your business case. Do you have one? Have you developed this within your organization? Next slide, please. It's very clear that a business case is vital to adding profit to a business enterprise. There's a group called MIT Sloan, and they put out a management review, and they've been doing this since 2009. In their 2012 survey, they interviewed about 5,600 respondents to their survey, and this is a global survey cutting across all business types. Of those respondents, about half of them are companies, and so these next few slides deal with the results from the companies. So in the 2012 survey, they found that 59% of companies who had changed 3 or 4 business model elements reported profit from their sustainability efforts. And of these, 60% of them said that sustainability not only added profit, but they did it because they had developed a business case for sustainability. In other words, the two go hand in hand. If you want to do sustainability right, and if you want to improve your chances of adding profit to your bottom line, a business case is very important. And they found this finding more than 1 year, in fact 3 years running. Next slide, please. In their 2013 survey, they asked the question about, have you got a clear business case? And if you look at the numbers across the previous 5 years, you can see that the number of companies, or percentage of companies that are developing their business case and using a business case has climbed from 30% in 2009 to 37% in 2013. Interesting to see that the number that have tried to do it has increased as well. The number that don't have it is decreasing, and the number that don't know is also decreasing. In other words, more and more companies realize they need to develop a business case for sustainability. Next slide, please. So, not sure where you're at in this particular situation, but if you don't have one, what's holding you back? Next slide, please. Some of us are stuck in this situation. Next slide, please. And some of us have real challenges that we need to face in our everyday working lives. So the MIT Sloan folks asked a question in 2012 about what are the obstacles? What's holding you back from developing your business case? About half of them said it's hard to do, and especially hard to do when you're looking at the intangible effects of sustainability. When you're improving safety or you're improving the morale, how do you value that in a business case for sustainability? About a third indicated that, oh, you know, I got competing priorities. I don't have time to do this. Or, and I think many of us face this, how do we develop the metrics that are going to really get at the issue? And others say they don't have a model or a framework. How am I going to do this? We'll talk a little bit more about that in the rest of this presentation. Slide 17, please. Another group a few years earlier looked at the challenges related to implementation or success of sustainability initiatives, because you have to realize you can build the business case, but if you don't get around to implementing it, it will fail. So what are the challenges that you face once you have your business case in place? Well, of course, business challenges were identified in this survey, and well, it's a 2009 survey, so I can understand that. But I think those things always will continue. The second challenge that was identified was difficulty in demonstrating the return on investment or making the business case. And then the other two things, fear of disrupting present business processes, we all have that. Change is a challenge. Or we don't know enough about how we should go about it. Next slide, please. So what's holding you back? Well, for me, the umbrella is the challenge of change. We need to find new ways or augment our current ways of doing things in order to get at the business case for sustainability and the one that works for us. Next slide, please. So, sustainability, when it's done right, next slide, leads to more profit, cash flow, and reputation. Next slide. But let's dig deeper and say sustainability, when it's done right, it recognizes and it acts on the business opportunities. Next slide. But how will you recognize these business opportunities? Next slide. And of course, the first step in that process is developing your business case for sustainability. Next slide, please. So, if you plan to develop it, you need to, I think, understand what perspective you're going to approach it from. We'll spend a couple of minutes talking about those perspectives. Slide 24, please. I've divided them into three categories: business entity, investment, and value chain. And we'll talk about each of these from a perspective standpoint and then look at ways of assessing business value for each of them. Next slide, please. So when I mention business entity, what do I mean by that? Whole business, part business. Many, many companies tackle sustainability from this perspective. The ease of it, of course, depends on the size and complexity of your operations. Small and medium-sized enterprises, I think anyway, have an easier time doing this. If you're only operating within Canada's boundaries, for example, or if you only have a few products in a couple of countries, then that's perhaps easier to get at than large global enterprises. But you could tackle it from a part business perspective. And I think that depends on how easy it is to identify the discrete operational boundaries of the area or part of the business that you want to look at. Maybe you have a facility that's a standalone entity or a business unit, and you can get at all of the factors and information that you need related to that. In that case, you could look at the sustainability of that aspect of the business. Next slide, please. We can also look at it from the perspective of return on investment. So if we think about our normal return on investment, essentially it's economics, or generally we look at status quo versus some kind of more sustainable approach, but we tend to only look at the financial factors associated with that. But there is a way to look at it from a different perspective, and I'll call that the sustainability return on investment, where we not only include the economic values, but we try to put a value on the benefits and costs of items that don't have a market value. So for example, what is the value of improved lighting or improved safety or improved morale? What's the value of less risk or lower or different emissions? So the sustainability return on investment tries to get at those items. Next slide, please. And of course, if you take a value chain perspective in developing your business case, you can look at projects that require collaboration, for instance. You can engage your suppliers and your customers to improve the sustainability outcomes, look at packaging, recycling, transportation, and so on. This can provide some wins for all the players or stakeholders within the collaborative effort. You can also look at comparison. Compare and choose the more sustainable option. And this can be as simple as what cleaning product to buy, what service to hire, or what preferred behaviors do you want to encourage within your organization or community. Next slide, please. So these are the different perspectives we can take and what might be our assessment options. Next slide. Again, from the 3 different perspectives. Next slide, please. We'll look at business entity, and here's one that was developed by the MIT Sloan folks in 2009. It's a first step, do-it-yourself critical self-assessment. I noticed that RBC, for instance, has this on their website, so that you can go and find it there if you want. Next slide. This sustainability audit only has 10 questions, and they're divided into 3 parts. Framing the sustainability agenda, developing your business case, and executing the sustainability strategy. Next slide. The sustainability audit is something that you could do today. Once I'm done here, you can go and get this off the web and you'll be done in an hour. But it'll give you a great start. Next slide, please. An example question. Our company has developed a clear and compelling business case for our sustainability efforts over the short term, 1 to 3 years. And the answers? Not yet. Oh, I have some sense of what we're doing. Well, we have a clear understanding, or we have a clear and compelling short-term business case. By answering these 10 questions, you can get a snapshot of where you stand today and where you might start developing your business case. Next. You can go a little deeper and start developing worksheets that try to get at evaluating your business case. Bob Willard, who is a Canadian here in Ontario, in 2012, he put out his latest set of spreadsheets. It's a do-it-yourself business case self-assessment, and it looks at 7 attributes: revenue, energy, waste, materials, productivity, attrition, and risks. So Bob's quite happy for anybody to use these, change them, revise them, and it gives you a snapshot of where your business value is related to these sustainability attributes. Next slide. But frankly, there are lots of options out there. The World Business Council on Sustainable Development has a toolbox. You can log on there. They take you through all the different steps of developing your sustainability plan, and including your business plan. Next slide. You can go to SAP. Perhaps you use this in your business. They have a bolt-on that relates to sustainability, so you could go there. Next slide. Or, of course, there are all kinds of consultants who are happy to help you make the business case for sustainability. This is Deloitte and Touche's particular diagram on it, but there are all kinds of consultants like KPMG and others and so on who are very happy to assist you in developing the value proposition for your sustainability program. Next slide. So, investment, return on investment. I'm going to spend a few minutes on this because it may be a new idea for some of you. Next slide, please. I'm assuming that everybody is familiar with the standard approach to return on investment, which is a financial return. If we look at it from a project perspective, we look at what are the impacts on cash and revenue. So we look at capital, operations, and maintenance, and we come up with our return on investment. But if we expand our vision just a little bit wider and look at the other internal non-cash impacts and try to put a value on those, then we can start to really reveal they call it the triple bottom line of the value that comes with sustainability programs. So in this case, the diagram shows productivity, mobility, health, and safety. Well, if we look at health and safety, what is the value of decreasing the number of incidents which could lead to accidents within our organization? I think many of us clearly understand the health and safety model, and that is definitely a huge aspect of sustainability within the chemical industry. But we can take it even wider than that and look at the external impacts. And for us, for example, emissions can be huge. Waste, less water use, noise. One that's not listed here is odor, for instance. If you have a project that decreases your odor emissions at a facility, just imagine what kind of savings you can have with fewer complaints from the community. You improve your social license to operate. You decrease the amount of time your own people spend dealing with complaints, right from the president right down to the person who answers the phone. All of that can be a savings. And if you can find a way, and there is a methodology associated with this, if you can use that methodology to put a value on this benefit, then you can start to really see how one program, the sustainability attributes of it, can relate to the project and improve your bottom line. Next slide, please. So this particular company has provided a number of things on the web that one can access in order to try and understand what's involved here. And it gets complicated fairly fast. So what I've decided to do is just take an example generic output to try and reveal some of the ideas that will be evident when you go through this process. Next slide, please. So if I just focus on the top half of this table, looking at the annual value of benefits. So if I take just a financial approach to this project, I might say, oh, I'm going to be up almost $500,000. This is good. But if I look at the sustainability attributes, in other words, include not only economic but social and environmental aspects of it, then I start to see other values to the project. So for example, if I've been able to identify the cash benefit related to reducing my energy bill or reducing my water bill, that pops out very nicely. But sometimes there isn't a cash value. So for example, greenhouse gases. Maybe you have an internal price attached to carbon emissions, maybe not, but you can certainly find one and put one in place in order to look at the savings if you can reduce your emissions. The same with other pollutants if you can reduce them. Savings from reduced water use. Maybe your water bill could go down, but also there is a benefit to the environment. Essentially, water should stay within the watershed, and if you don't have to access or displace that water, then there is a benefit to that. And so if through this methodology a value is placed on that, it starts to reveal why one choice in a project might be better than another choice. Next slide, please. So in the bottom half, we get at some of the metrics that many of us are familiar with. So the main point here is that the sustainability approach can really reveal why it might be why this particular choice or alternative might be superior. Net present value is quite a bit higher for the sustainability approach. Return on investment, more than double. Discounted payback period, half the time. Internal rate of return, twice the amount. Benefit to cost ratio, twice. So it starts to help others within your organization understand why you might want to pursue this particular alternative. And it really gets important when you've got competing alternatives, and from a financial standpoint something might be borderline, but if you go and look at the sustainability attributes, it may be very evident that you should pursue that particular alternative. Next slide, please. And of course, there are the physical changes or things that could come out from pursuing a particularly sustainable project alternative. And these are great things that you can use then for finding support not only within your company, but finding support within your community. pursuing a particular alternative. So you can talk about reduced emissions, reduced water use, reduced waste. From a social standpoint, certainly we want to get and maintain our safety record down to zero injuries. Improve productivity. All of these feed into, guess what? Reputation, profit, cash flow. So a sustainability return on investment approach can help you identify those things that we don't normally put a value on. Next slide, please. So has anybody actually done this? Well, I can only provide examples to you that I've been able to find on the internet. I'm quite certain that there are many out there who have done this, and I'll introduce you to some software that has been developed in order to pursue this alternative, which suggests to me that that there is a market out there. However, in this case, with this particular company, they've identified that the City of Calgary, the City of Edmonton, Enbridge Gas Distribution, EPCOR, and the Public Health Agency of Canada. Here are 5 organizations that have used sustainable return on investment to try and tease out the sustainability attributes of various project alternatives. Now, in these particular examples, these are fairly large-scale examples involving many stakeholders, and when you invite them all to the table, you get a lot greater buy-in as to what alternative would work best, and of course it creates great transparency within the community. But frankly, when I look at this particular system, I don't see why we can't use it within the business and invite your internal stakeholders to pursue this particular analysis as well. Next slide, please. So, total cost assessment is same kind of a methodology, just a slightly different name. It's a do-it-yourself assessment. You can find the manual and the spreadsheets free online. It was developed first in 1991. In 97, the American Institute of Chemical Engineers took up the methodology, and they thoroughly validated it within the industry. It was spun off and commercialized in 2004, and a company called Earthshift 3 Pillars has launched software related to it in 2012. So you can actually go and get the free materials online, or you can download a 30-day trial of this software, or you can in fact go to Earthshift, and as I said earlier, they'd be happy to assist you with working through this process. And there are other companies that would do it too, of course. Next slide. So within this total cost assessment, they also have a checklist, and this is something you can try today. An example question in this checklist has to do with eco-efficiency and particularly materials. So if we look at the questions, it's a yes-no response to it. Are materials that you're using in a project, for example, are they the most renewable? Are recycled materials used where possible? Is the overall amount of material used reduced to the most economical and practical extent possible? What the checklist does is it starts to highlight for you where you need to think more about the sustainability aspects of your project, and then you can start to decide what aspects should be included within a sustainable return on investment analysis. So this checklist again is something you can do before the end of the day if you're into it. Okay, next slide please. One more approach having to do with return on investment, but maybe not quite as deeply into trying to value non-market items. What this approach called structured decision making does is it essentially puts all the items out on the table, and it allows you to compare the various options one to the other, and the idea is that visually you can try and identify which particular option is more sustainable than the other. This is the slide shows a case study that was done by Industry Canada with BC Hydro. And basically in this particular one, option A was preferred. So the financial return of option A was $1 million, but option B actually brought in $250,000 more. However, the footprint of option A, in other words, its impact on wetland was greater. And option B has a smaller footprint, which from an environmental standpoint is very nice. They determined in this analysis that the risk of contamination to soil was about the same between option B, but higher for option C. However, the length of the lines were 2 kilometers more. So you have 2 kilometers where you have increased risk, and so this was deemed to be a negative. So this is where you can then look at option A, B, and C, and for a variety of reasons then you might choose option B. Perhaps the $250,000 can offset the risk of the extra 2 kilometers in the line. So structured decision making is another alternative that you might want to take in order to evaluate different options or alternatives within for projects, for example. Next slide. Okay, value chain, third one. Some options in here in this particular category have to do with collaboration, and I'll talk in a few minutes about comparison. This collaboration can be extremely powerful, but you need someone who is ready and willing to build relationships, because you have to look to your suppliers and look to your customers. And maybe you're a supplier yourself, and your customers may be looking to you. So you can be on either side of the fence in this situation. I was at a conference about 1.5 years ago, and Christina Amorum, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer for Life Technologies, was talking at lunchtime. And so she was giving several anecdotes about her exploits in looking for sustainable projects to pursue. And she literally went dumpster diving looking at her waste. And she said that she saw all these blue lab gloves in their operations. Of course, for any of you who've spent any time on a bench, as soon as you do something else, off come the gloves and on come a new pair. So her waste was full of these lab gloves, and they were just going into the waste stream. So what she did was she went to all of her suppliers globally and asked them about opportunities for recycling the blue lab gloves. And she said, in fact, nobody had developed a system to do that. So after some discussions, one of her suppliers stepped up, worked with her. They developed a process for recycling the blue lab gloves. So Life Technologies had a win because they wanted to decrease their waste that was going out the door. And this company that provided the blue lab gloves, they had a win because guess what? They got a global contract to supply these lab gloves. So collaboration can be very powerful. Next slide, please. We also have a huge number of lists, labels, guides, and tools that we can use to compare. And this can also become a significant part of our business case for sustainability. So for example, in the US, the General Services Administration have developed a list of green products. You can go online, access this, and what it does is it gives you information about what product content or what types of products are more sustainable than others. They don't always go for the brand name materials. For instance, they might say, well, if you're going to buy fuel, it should have a certain percentage content of ethanol or something like that. So they'll give you a generic indication of which products are more sustainable. We can do this quite easily with labels too, of course. Many of you have seen labels. Eco-logo is one of them. The idea being that if you work this into your business strategy and say, okay, first thing you do when you're going to buy a product is to try and access products that have been certified under this label. And then you can avoid, someone else has already done the comparison or the certification for you, and that can help streamline your sustainability strategy. In fact, in this particular company, and I'm sure many others do, they have their databases online, so you can actually go and find what products are certified, in this case for their sustainability products and their energy efficient products. Next slide, please. Then we have guides where they actually take brand name products, different sizes, and they compare them for their various sustainable attributes. Most of the ones I've found online are consumer products. There are a few that go a little broader, but clearly the appeal of this kind of approach tends to be from the consumer perspective. Then we have other organizations like the Green Chemistry Council, which is a business council. They will collect or catalog tools. In this case, they've put them into product sectors and categorized them into restricted substances lists, a group of standards, labels, and certifications, third-party evaluation systems, consumer guides, so that sometimes this can be a portal if your business has the same kind of perspective as the portal's business perspective, then you may strike gold and be able to address many of your questions and concerns through a certain portal if you can find the right one that matches your business. Next slide. Then we have calculator tools. There are ones online that are do-it-yourself calculators, although I've found fewer of these. One of them I did find by the Buy Smart Network in BC there's a workbook online applying the total cost of ownership to sustainability purchasing. So, for instance, it not only looks at the economics of it, but what do you do with that waste stream? Is the packaging, is the material overpackaged, and then you're stuck with dealing with the waste that's created from it. So this workbook helps you to understand what you're getting yourself into when you buy a particular service or product. And then, of course, there are all kinds of ready-to-use calculators. And for me, when I review these or look at these, sometimes it's difficult to find the one that just does exactly what you want it to do. So, but you can be rewarded if you are persistent in looking for the one that suits your needs. For example, Environment Canada has an emissions calculator online that can be used for whatever purpose you may need. Next slide, please. And then we can get into behaviors. I know a lot of companies certainly understand that we need to deal with culture. If we're going to shift the perspective of the company, just like building a safety culture, we need to expand and build a sustainability culture. So we can compare how our company is doing from a behavior standpoint against other companies, and some would say this is benchmarking. So, for example, in this case, here again is something that you could do today. The Energy Star folks have developed something called an Energy Management Assessment Matrix. And in this case, you can go through the set of questions and compare yourself to the guidelines, the Energy Star guidelines for energy management. So, next slide, please. An example question from this particular assessment has to do with your commitment to continuous improvement. We all identify with this particular idea, and in this case, in this question, the focus is on an energy team. Do you have one in your company? So, in answering your question, the questions posed use You can rate it. There's little or no evidence. In other words, no, our company does not have an energy network. There are some elements. We have an informal organization around energy, or you can say, oh yes, fully implemented. We have an energy team identified. They know who they are. They know what they're doing. It's cross-functional. We have a program. So again, you can do this today. You can go and assess yourself from an energy management standpoint. Next slide, please. So we've looked at the business case for sustainability. Lots of opportunity from the standpoint of business value, and there are many options for developing the business case. In looking into this and working with this over the last couple of years, I think it's really important to understand where you want to jump in, whether you want to do it from a business entity perspective, whether you want to look at return on investment, or look at it from a value chain. Sometimes it's important to start small and practice, find out what works within your organization, and then build on that. Next slide, please. So, the challenge of change. I think for many of us, that's what holds us back. It's something that never goes away. It's part of business. It's the dynamics of business, and we all need to find what works for us in order to make change happen. Next slide, please. So back to this original idea. Sustainability, when it's done right, leads to more profit, cash flow, and reputation. Next slide, please. And if we look at sustainability when it's done right, next slide, you have to recognize and then act on the business opportunities. Next slide, please. And of course, the key thing is to recognize them. How will you do that? Next slide. The whole premise of this presentation is that you will do that by developing your business case for sustainability. And from that, you will create success for yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jane. Sorry, I had muted myself so you didn't hear me when I was sneezing. That was a wonderful presentation, and we've got some questions all queued up. The first one, how we're going to do this is I'll read out the question, and then Jane, you can answer it. I'll unmute the ASCII, if you will. So our first question comes from Sue Carter, who's wondering where we can find the methodology for the SROI.
I have all of those links in a list, and I can provide that to Lauren, and she can send out that list of links to anyone who would like it.
Wonderful. Sue, does that work for you? Sue, I will take that as a yes. Okay, great. Moving on, our very own Bob Masterson has a few comments he'd like to make. Bob, go right ahead.
Hi, yeah, thanks Lauren, and thanks Jane. Jane, just to say thanks for putting this together. I think you did a really good job. Providing a nice framework for what's a very complex and can be confusing area. You've given people some different ways to approach this issue, and you've certainly pointed them in the right direction for tools. So thanks very much for doing that. I'm sure it wasn't an easy job to sort through. One of the questions, maybe you touched on it a bit, but I wonder if you could expand on, you're talking here about the companies that are sort of self-interested, they want to do this because it's the right thing to do. Can you comment a bit about the trends and some of the pressures? Maybe you see some our companies and other industries' own supply chains. How much is this still optional versus becoming increasingly imperative? I guess that's the question I'm trying to ask. And just your professional judgment.
Well, I think basically the trend is that more and more companies are understanding that they need to address sustainability. I still think many need to dive into the topic and really appreciate what it's all about. It's not, we talk about greenwashing. And so there's a certain amount of that going on. But if you dive into the topic and realize that if you tackle all three perspectives, that it actually is a huge benefit to your company. It's, you know, I've talked to people that have taken it up as something that they understand they need to learn about and understand, and when they get it, they kind of look at me and the light bulb goes on, and they say, you know, why wouldn't we do this? So I think more and more companies are understanding that, but still not nearly enough. And I think the one slide I showed that really only 37% have a business case for sustainability, you know, that we're not even at the halfway mark, but the trend is increasing.
Great, thank you, Bob. We'll move over now, unless you have another follow-up.
No, it's something rolling around in my mind. But I guess maybe Jane, it seems like, from my perspective anyway, one of the areas where I see companies that get it more, or really embrace the concept of sustainability, is when they can find a way to link it into their everyday business. So it's not an add-on. You know, it's not, you see a lot of companies, I guess, it's not that it's greenwash, I don't want to go that far, but if your sustainability plan involves cleaning up parks and giving money to local community organizations, okay, that's important, but it's not who you are and what you do every day. It seems like it's when companies can really take these concepts and ask difficult questions about, well, what do we do and how do we do it, and might we do it differently in the future. That's when we seem to see some real leapfrogging beyond just the business as usual. So companies like, you know, you haven't mentioned it in particular, but Dow, very aggressive investments in their R&D platform for sustainability, has BASF, DuPont, and others. They seem to be, you know, not at the point of saying, geez, how do I evaluate this in a particular project? They're really trying to drive the whole organization in a different direction for the future.
Yeah, it reminds me of I was sitting at a conference it was a closed conference of all quite global companies, and it was quite interesting. There were, I don't know, 50 of us in the room, and the question was posed. Many of them were chief sustainability officers there, and so the question was posed, well, how big a team do you have? Because, you know, the person was saying, in my company there's me and one other. Well, actually the largest companies there, which were global companies, they only identified their sustainability team. The maximum team was 5 people, because what they really said was, it's the whole company is my team. It's sustainability, in order to be successful, has to be embedded. It's not a silo, it's not an add-on. It's like, oh, this is what I do in my work. It's part of what I do. And so that's how, if we can drive it into the everyday work business, then absolutely it'll succeed.
Bob, excellent. Okay, I take that to mean she answered your questions wonderfully, as always. And thank you, Bob. We're going to move to Lorna Young, our regional director in BC, who unfortunately doesn't have a mic, so I'll pass on her thank yous through me, I suppose. But Jane, she's wondering if you found any accepted accounting practices that quantify SROI as a line item in financial reporting.
There is a short answer is no, but the long answer is they're working on it. I think there is a huge amount of work that has to be done with the financial sector, and that's in progress. And of course, I'm struggling to remember the particular name of integrated reporting, I guess maybe is the term best used. So that process is in place, and that's looking at a global process for taking sustainability attributes and integrating it within your financial statements. But it's still in discussion and stakeholder input process.
Yeah, Lorna would like to point out that this would be a great leap forward when it does eventually happen.
Yes, wouldn't it? Yes.
So thank you, Jane. I think that about wraps it up in terms of questions. Last minute call. But otherwise, Jane, I just wanted to thank you so much on behalf of CIIC here in Ottawa and all of our attendees, member companies, and verifiers who have tuned in for this. And with your permission, we'd like to post your excellent presentation and all its slides on our member link, and
Yes.
I'll allow people to contact you if they have any specific follow-up questions or something slips their mind now and they think of it at 2 in the morning on a Sunday. They'll be able to harass you via email.
Absolutely, and I'll send a list of links to some of the items that I touched on today. I'll send them to Lauren, and perhaps you can send them out to anybody who might make that request.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Great. And stay tuned for our next sustainability-themed webinar coming up later in the summer. Thanks so much, everyone, and have yourselves a great afternoon.
Take care.